Following up on my last demons video, I had a few spare examples that I couldn't fit into the concept of the last video, so I'm including them all together here. And the first I learned of after my recent video on the Templars, what they became. They've become things called the Heresiarchs. The Heresiarchs are the mutated and corrupted forms of the Knights Templar that opened the gates of hell 8 centuries ago. The Heresiarch is a titanic monstrosity with no face, horned shoulders, 4 breasts and a cloak and cape melded to its flesh. Its clawed hand clutches an enormous sickle as levitating stone tablets wreathed in lightning surround the Heresiarch's infernal frame. Next up we have the larvalbeastlord. Sometimes the unluckiest warbands encounter creatures that one cannot hope to defeat with a trench club or a bolt action rifle. Greatest of the unholy creatures that hell has unleashed to trouble the unhappy world, have the power to lay waste to entire cities and must be confronted by entire armies with heavy artillery, aerial bombardment and armoured divisions. One example of these behemoths are the beastlords that emerge from the hellmouth, heralded by dire portents and visions of the devout brothers and sisters of the Synod of Strategic Prophecy. The reason or purpose why Inferno disgorges these gargantuan monsters is unknown, save for their tendency to extremely destructive rampages. If not hunted down, they eventually disappear into deserts or high mountains, never to be seen again, save in the dark tales of travellers witnessing foul mountains or hills that sometimes stir from their deep sleep. Specimens depicted here in the moments before the destruction of Nesabar. That's the art you're seeing. The larvalbeastlord seen here is still in its infancy. Only one has ever been glimpsed when fully grown, and the recon element that sighted it did not survive the encounter. Some warbands have engaged their enemies over an unmarked hill, only to realise to their horror they are fighting on the back of a slumbering, colossal abomination, bent on devouring anything in its path, and now the wretched. If you are a heretic legion, or the court of the 7-headed serpent, both sides make use of them. If you are unlucky enough to fall into the hands of a heretic warband, when they are raiding or during a battle, when purchased from the slave markets, or if you are a fool and you've had a little wander out into the domains of the damned, you will be taken and then you will be used as a currency, and many priests pay their taxes to their demon overlords in this way, in human flesh. There is a great currency to demons outside of having the physical slave, because they receive power through the pain and suffering of the human. The life you've had as a wretch is not one to envy. You can be worked to death in the factories of the 66 lords, butchered for meat, or worst of all, sold to the agents of the court of the 7-headed serpent and taken through the hellgate. But there is one path to freedom available to you. The wretched can volunteer to serve in the legions as the lowest of the low, the most disposable of penal troops. Such desperate men and women are branded with cursed flesh-eating tattoos as a safeguard against escape attempts, and heavily drugged to degrade and dull their will and wit, while still leaving their aggression intact. Heretic elites discard their lives carelessly, as the sacrifice of their life on the battlefield counts as a virtuous deed which will be rewarded by their infernal patrons. An even worse fate awaits those wretched who end up in the hands of the court of the 7-headed serpent. As these unfortunate souls possess not a drop of demon blood, they are used as disposable shock troops, or are to be used as subjects of torture to power the goetic magic of the sorcerers and other users of the dark arts. Captured during one of the hunts of the court, sold to the devils at the heretic domains, or having the misfortune to have foolishly pushed through in the places where the borders of the world are thin, their minds are scarred by witnessing the horror of damnation while still alive. And next up we have the Sin Eater. There are many paths to becoming the monstrous abomination known as Sin Eaters. Some were starving wretches who would eat anything to stay alive. Others hedonistic gourmands, searching for the rarest delicacies. But the most famous is the Devourer of Wormlock. A priest in the small Bavarian town of Wormlock had a terrible secret. He didn't just take people's confessions, he delighted in them, savoured them. licked his fingers at them. The greater the sin, the more he enjoyed it. Eventually, he began extolling his flock to commit more grievous sins as a twisted means to expunge them, but secretly revelled in their guilty confessions. The priest's perverse obsession kept him in the confessional booth night and day, and over the following months he grew unnaturally, horrendously fat, demanding the townsfolk keep him sated with near-constant confessions of their sins. The townsfolk grew frightened, refusing to go into the church to face the disgusting priest and his litany of curses and demands. No one knows exactly what happened next, but a terrified county sheriff discovered the priest in the church, swollen to near bursting and slick with gore, and bellowing hideous blasphemies, even as the sheriff and his deputies burned the church and the empty town. Now there is another subject I want to cover in this video that is too short for its own, so I'm going to pop it in here. It's about one of the warbands who follow the Prince of Greed. They call themselves the Knights of Avarice. Such heretics display their wealth extravagantly and prefer to carry the most expensive and hard to acquire weapons, armour and equipment, suffering none to join them who lack the means to obtain their glittering panoply. They are festooned with chains of gold and finest silk cloaks. Their armour is gilded with gold and decorated with precious stones, and the handles of their great coin hammers are made of the rarest of wood. Yet despite the opulent wealth at display, the finery is tarnished by the blood and soot that spew from the hellgate, and the delicate artistic filigree of their golden masks is both terrible and beautiful in equal measure. In combat they favour hammers and clubs that break the bones but leave the flesh and blood intact, as well as poison gas and highly accurate rifles. They scorn crude and destructive fire or explosive weapons that could damage any object of value. After the Knights of Avarice have claimed victory in combat, they scour the battlefield or any settlement they have conquered like a swarm of locusts. Anything and everything of value is taken, metals from brass to bronze, silver to gold, art objects, precious stones, livestock, trade goods, rare tombs and scrolls. Everything is for them. All are meticulously catalogued and carried away by slaves and demonic beasts of burden, or great armoured cars that take the stolen loot to the underground treasure chambers, which act as the temples of Mammon. Even the dead are stripped of their flesh with the detached skill of seasoned butchers, ready to be sold at market. Internal organs taken from fallen victims are carefully preserved in alchemical liquids to be sold to the scientists of the infernal laboratories. For the heretics of the path of Mammon, hoarding treasure is not mere acquisition of wealth, it is their religion, their compulsion. Ironically, they gain little pleasure from their vast wealth, as their greed makes them continuously desire ever greater riches. Thus their warbands forever roam no man's land, looking for forgotten treasures or foes to dissect and turn into wealth, for the greed of Mammon will never be sated. So I hope you enjoyed this mixed up lore video. Drop me a comment down below what you thought about it, and if you like this video on the Crusade, I've got a couple more. Try this one.